Welcome to Dust Ballads, where every tale of the Old West carries its own song. Out here, love can burn brighter than lantern light, and vengeance can echo louder than gunfire across a canyon. Tonight, you'll hear my story. It begins with a woman whose laughter once held a town together, and the man who tried to own her with fear. It ends with a vow spoken on a bridge at high noon, when justice and blood became the same river. If you believe the past still has voices worth hearing, ride with us. Subscribe now and keep the lantern lit, because in this channel, no story dies until it's sung. I never meant to come back to Ash Creek as a man made of vows. I meant to come back as a husband with soil under my nails and laughter on my porch. But the road decided otherwise. If you'll stay with me, I'll show you how love taught me the language of vengeance and how vengeance, in the end, kept spelling her name. My name is Jonah Hale. People here used to call me honest, which is what towns call a man before they ask him to lie for their comfort. I grew up 3 ridges west of the Carter place. When we were children, Eliza Carter and I raced cicadas along the fence line and swore we would never leave each other alone with the dark. Those were the years before the railroad split the valley and before Silas Creed learned how to buy the sky. Creed didn't start out as a tyrant. He started as a merchant with a clever smile, a knack for credit, and a gift for telling men what they wanted to hear about themselves. Then he discovered that fear pays better than goodwill. He bought cattle, then land, then people who could be bought. The day Bram Pike pinned on a star and called Creed an upstanding benefactor, every clock in Ash Creek started measuring something colder than time. I worked leather and iron, a saddle maker by trade, and saved money the way antelopes save water. Eliza taught school in the church, where the bell rang slightly flat, as if ashamed. I asked for her hand beside the mulberry saplings on her father's porch, and she said yes in a voice that made my ribs feel like a door being opened after winter. We planned a small house near the river. We had wood stacked, names picked for the mules, and a ledger full of honest arithmetic. Then the rail camp payroll was ambushed on the far road. Eliza's father was shot for refusing to kneel, and the sheriff's report read like a bedtime story for the rich. I believed the truth could be coaxed out, the way you warm a stiff bridle until it remembers to bend. I went to Pike with questions that tasted like iron. He smiled and told me grief makes men unruly, and that Silas Creed had donated enough to the church to outweigh anger in the eyes of heaven. He said the culprit was already hanging north of the ridge, a drifter who had conveniently confessed. He said to marry the girl and let God sort the rest. Eliza's lantern stayed in the window those first nights, burning humble, as if modesty could shield it. I swore to her I would not do anything foolish. I meant it when I said it. Then Creed's riders came down our road uninvited, wearing permission like cologne. They stood in our yard, the way men stand in a field they think they own. The one with the black bandana laughed at our woodpile and kicked our mule just to hear a living thing make a frightened sound. Eliza stepped out with her chin up and the truth in her eyes, and the shortest rider tipped his hat and called her darling with a mouth that had never spoken a pure word in its life. I held the line until they crossed the porch step. Then I forgot my promise and remembered my hands. 4 on 1 is not a fight, it's a lesson. I woke with blood in my mouth and my cheek cut open like a pocket. The riders were gone, our wood scattered, the mule trembling, the lantern knocked sideways but still alive. Eliza knelt over me with a cloth and anger sheathing her voice. She said we would leave for a month and come back when tempers had cooled. She said we would marry in the next town, where men could tell the difference between law and its costume. We never got the month. 2 nights later, when the moon looked like a coin held between a rich man's fingers, the Carter barn went red and the air went hungry. Her father died trying to pull a stubborn mare from its stall. The report said accident. The town said tragic. The wind said the truth, but no one bothered to listen. I asked Pike what it would take to reopen a case. He said a miracle. Creed stood beside him, nodding like a priest at the altar of convenience. Eliza did not weep where anyone could see. She cleaned, she taught, she planted late peas, and when the lantern went out in the window, it was only because dawn had arrived. We buried her father under an oak that had outlived 2 droughts and a winter of locusts. Creed sent flowers tied with silk, bright enough to insult the sun. I sent the silk back with a note that said I would rather be poor than indebted to rot. He smiled when he read it, like a man taking measure of a nail before deciding which board to split. I tried to leave vengeance where it belonged, in the thoughts you sweep out before sleep. But silence has a way of becoming a second mouth that eats you from the inside. I began to notice how every ledger that crossed Creed's desk ended more neatly than it began. I watched Pike write 2 receipts for 1 load and call it balancing the books. I heard about a clerk at the feed store, Amos Walsh, who had kept private tallies and then drowned himself in a cider barrel he had never once tasted. His widow Lydia stopped looking people in the eye and kept her hands folded tight enough to hurt. When I went to see Lydia, I did not go as a crusader. I went as a neighbor with a jar of plum preserves and the kind of sorrow that knows its own shoes. She let me in. Her house was tidy, in the way houses become when a person is trying to control the only things left that will obey. She said her husband died honest, and that honest is a word greedy men use when they need air. She opened a cupboard and, without ceremony, set a tin box on the table. She said I could look as long as I remembered to be kind. Inside were copies of vouchers, uses of seals that didn't belong together, and a list of names being paid for shifts never worked. A second list catalogued accidents too symmetrical to be accidents, broken necks from falls too low to break necks, drownings in troughs too shallow to drown a calf, fires that started without lanterns. At the bottom was a scribble that made my throat go dry. Carter deed, reassigned for mercy and burial costs. Witness, Sheriff Bram Pike. Recipient, Silas Creed. I took the box to Cal Donnelly, who had a forger's heart and a memory like a ledger that couldn't be bullied. He read the papers without swearing, which is how I knew they were bad. He said a document means nothing without a voice to stand beside it, and the voices in Ash Creek were either rented or scared. He said if I wanted to fight in daylight, I needed a storm loud enough to drown out the first volley. He said Lydia would testify if the church bell rang and the pews were full. I asked Eliza if she would stand with me where light could find her. She looked at the lantern, then at me, then at the spot on the porch rail where my heel had left its old dent. She said she would not stand for a performance. She would stand for a reckoning that did not pretend to be gentle. She handed me her father's pocket watch, cracked glass and all, and told me to wind it every time my fear tried to tell me what hour it was. We called the town to the church on a Thursday when the wind was cooperatively loud. Pike arrived first, measuring aisles with the smugness of a man who thought he was the final paragraph in every story. Creed followed, all pressed cloth and borrowed sanctity. I read from Lydia's box. I read the duplicate vouchers and the list of impossible accidents. I held up the deed transfer like a rotten loaf of bread and asked if anyone here felt brave enough to call it fresh. Lydia stood and said her husband had gone to Pike for help and come home quiet as a field after locusts. Cal nodded once and did not sit down again. Pike called it a grieving woman's confusion. Creed called it a conspiracy by small men who resented large success. I did not call it anything. I turned to Eliza in the second pew and asked her if she would keep the lantern lit if the night refused to end. She said yes without blinking. Then I told the town what I would do at noon the next day. I said I would stand on the Ash Creek Bridge with the papers and the names and a vow older than my bones. I said if Creed wanted to keep what was not his, he could come claim it under God's sky rather than behind paid curtains. I said if Pike's badge meant anything, it could earn its meaning where a man's breath fogs the same air as his cowardice. I slept that night in my boots, which is a poor man's way of telling his courage there's no turning back. Just before dawn, the lantern in Eliza's window flared high for the first time since grief moved in. I took her father's watch in my hand and wound it until the spring felt like a heartbeat returning to a body. I thought about the house we didn't build and the mulberries we didn't plant. I thought about the way Eliza rests her palm against my chest when she wants to memorize a decision. I thought about how some promises are safer kept in the open. When noon came, I was on the bridge with Lydia's box open beside my boots. The creek ran mean with late summer and the wind argued with the trees like an old married couple. I looked down the road and saw dust moving like a thought men are ashamed to admit. Horses emerged and with them, choices. Pike rode in front because false authority enjoys being first. Creed rode behind him and smiled like he was about to purchase a better version of himself. Deputies fanned out left and right, the kind of men who aim best when they think someone better is watching. I told them I would waste no sermon on men who had already sold their ears. I held up the deed and said a man's grave is not a cashier's window. I held up the accident list and said bad luck has never been so tidy. I held up the duplicate vouchers and said if a line of numbers repeats itself like prayer beads, then someone is praying to a god too small to save them. Pike hissed something about order. Creed laughed softly and said I was heroic in the way washing is heroic, temporary and bound to be redone by women. I looked past them toward the town, where on the rise you could just make out a woman's silhouette at a porch rail. The lantern hung there, though the sun was full. I said I came for a vow, not for applause. I said I came to read the truth until even the river remembered it. I said there would be no bargain smaller than justice, and no justice smaller than the light. That is where I leave you before the first song. I need you to know exactly how the road felt under my boots and how the ring on its leather cord tapped my sternum like a second pulse. I need you to stand with me on the bridge and feel the wind choose sides. I need you to hear Eliza's name the way I hear it when the world goes quiet, not as a memory asking to be preserved, but as a command asking to be obeyed.
I set the box on the bridge rail, creek talking low, papers like feathers from storms long ago. I said her name to the water so courage could swim, and the wind answered back like it knew who to win.
Keep the lantern at noon, let the truth burn through. If the sun looks away, let the flame be the view.
I'll stand where the river rides justice and sand, with her vow on my chest and the papers in hand.
Sheriff with a borrowed star, banker with a grin, numbers on their fingers where the guilt should begin.
They called me a story, they called me a fool, but the bell in my ribs rang a different rule.
Keep the lantern at noon, let the truth burn through. If the sun looks away, let the flame be the view.
I'll stand where the river rides justice and sand, with her vow on my chest I translated.
If mercy costs blood, then I'll pay what I can.
But I won't sell a promise to purchase a man. Hooves like a verdict, dust like a veil. I lifted the deed and I read out the tale.
No accident tidy, no ledger that clean, no law but the light for the things we have seen.
Keep the lantern at noon, let the truth burn through. If the sun looks away, let the flame be the view.
I'll stand till the river and wind understand
That her vow is a country and I'm its last man.
The bridge held its breath with me. Noon is when shadows stand directly under a man, too short to hide him, too honest to flatter him. Creed and Pike rode closer, deputies spreading like dogs circling a wounded stag. I was not wounded, I was sharpened. Pike spoke first. He said order would not tolerate spectacle. He said Ash Creek needed calm more than it needed truth. His voice carried that smug certainty that comes with a badge rented by the month. Creed laughed softly like a banker counting coins someone else had earned. He told me I was brave in the way dust storms are brave, loud, inconvenient, and destined to fade. He said Eliza would have been happier had she accepted his hand, his gifts, his empire of lies. My knuckles clenched on the papers until sweat stained the ink. I told him Eliza chose the lantern, not his chandelier. She chose the sound of a river, not his vault. She chose me, not because I was wealthy, but because I was honest. His smile cracked like porcelain dropped in dirt. The deputies shifted uneasily, men who knew their pay was minted from grief. For a moment, the world was perfectly balanced. My vow against his empire, one bridge between us. Then the first shot came, not from me, not from Creed, but from a deputy too eager to prove himself. The bullet struck the railing near my shoulder and split wood into splinters. The crowd that had gathered on the ridge screamed and scattered, but not all of them ran. Eliza stood unmoving, the lantern still burning though the sun was cruelly bright. Her presence steadied me more than armor ever could. I raised my revolver and answered not with panic but with proof. I read louder than the gunfire. I shouted the names written in Lydia's box, the accidents too neat to be real, the signatures too repeated to be honest. My voice clashed with the crack of rifles, but words, once spoken, cannot be unsaid. A bullet grazed my arm, fire raced down to my wrist, but I did not lower the papers. Deputies fired, townsfolk fired back. Chaos became scripture, each gunshot a verse. Pike dismounted and drew his revolver. He stalked toward me with the grin of a man convinced the world exists only to watch him win. I told him he wore his badge like a shroud and that it would be buried with him. His answer was lead. He fired, the ball ripping past my ribs, close enough to remind me that vengeance makes poor armor. I steadied my hand and fired back. His badge rang when the bullet struck, spinning off his chest before the force threw him down. He gasped once, as if surprised that truth could be that fast. Creed tried to run, men like him always do. He spurred his horse toward the river, papers fluttering from his coat like feathers from a dying bird. I followed, bleeding, half dizzy, but relentless. At the riverbank he turned and aimed a derringer, his last trick, his final prayer to the god of greed. He cursed my name, cursed Eliza's, cursed the daylight was invented. He fired. The ball struck my shoulder, hot iron tearing through flesh. Pain roared, but I did not fall. I leveled my revolver, thought of Eliza's hand on my chest, and pulled the trigger. Creed's scream cut short as the river embraced him. The deputies scattered without his coin to guide them. The town crept back, drawn by the noise, drawn by the smell of endings. Cal arrived with a rifle smoking, Lydia beside him, face pale but resolute. They saw Pike lying still, Creed gone with the current, and me swaying like a man with more blood outside than in. Eliza came down the slope, the lantern still lit. She placed it on the rail beside me. Its flame flickered stubbornly, daring the sun to argue. She touched my shoulder where blood soaked my shirt and whispered that the vow had been kept. Her voice was both forgiveness and command. I told her vows never end, they only change shape. I told her I would not leave again, not even if heaven itself sent for me. She smiled, a smile carved from sorrow but lit with something stronger. She said Ash Creek could breathe now. She said her father could rest. She said we could finally plant those mulberries. The town carried Pike's body to the gallows he had ordered built. They tore down the sheriff's office brick by brick. Creed's name was stripped from ledgers, his wealth divided to pay debts he had forced on others. Lydia's testimony was written down proper, and Cal's word became steel no man dared challenge. Ash Creek was not perfect after that day, but it had air again, air unbought. As for me, I walk with scars that remind me every dawn of what vows cost. But I walk beside Eliza, and each night the lantern burns. Not in defiance anymore, but in remembrance. I still hear the river when I close my eyes, carrying away the last cries of a man who thought power could outlive love. He was wrong. Love endures, vengeance ends, but vows live on.
The bridge remembers bullets, the river keeps the sound, but only love was heavy enough to hold its ground.
I carried proof in paper, I carried fire in bone,
And the vow she gave me would not walk alone. Ash Creek Vow, carved in flame, justice spoke and called her name. Through the blood, through the pain, love endures where lies are slain. Pike wore a badge like silver, but it could not stop the truth.
Creed wore a smile like armor, but it cracked beneath the proof.
I bled and stood unbroken with the lantern burning high, and the wind rode freedom on the open sky. Ash Creek Vow, carved in flame, justice spoke and called her name. Through the blood, through the pain, love endures where lies are slain. If the river carries darkness, let the flame remain. If the night repeats the story, let her vow sustain. No empire outlives mercy, no tyrant cheats the dawn. The lantern at her window tells me I belong. Now we'll plant the mulberries by the Carter door. Their roots will hold the valley like her hope before.
And every time the wind shifts, I will hear her say
That vows are not for dying they are for today. Ash Creek Vow, carved in flame, justice spoke and called her name. Through the blood, through the pain, love endures where lies are slain. Ash Creek Vow, I am still the man who keeps the lantern burning, who holds her hand.
If this story rode with you, subscribe to Dust Ballads. Every week we bring another tale of the Old West, where love and vengeance meet, and every story finds its song. Share this video with someone who believes that promises still matter, and let the lantern burn for the next ride.